Most of us think that we speak modern, ordinary English, but apparently we don't. We actually speak like soldiers. And today we have a fascinating book that we'll be discussing on Fauji Days. It's called Fauji Speak on Civvy Street, How the Military Shapes the Way We Talk. And it discusses how our everyday language, and I include corporate jargon, WhatsApp forwards, even social media, is so heavily influenced by the battlefield, but we don't even realize it. We're incredibly grateful to have the author with us, Mr. Pankaj P Singh. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So on the offset, I think I'd start with a very simple but straightforward question, and that is, what was the trigger for this book? Was there any particular moment, a phrase, or a word that just made you realize that this is what we should uncover?
It's an interesting story how this book came into existence. As you know, we publish a lot of military books under our Fauji Days imprint. And one of the requirements in almost every book would be to compile a glossary of terms. Because if you think about the normal average reader, there are many military terms they don't understand. So the idea of compiling glossaries at the end of every book gave rise to a thought that why don't we publish a book, a kind of a dictionary of military terms or a compendium.
Right.
While working on the compendium, and it's still work in progress, we hope to publish it one of these days very soon, we chanced upon these phrases which were of military origin, like when you read where a word came from and you suddenly realize there's a very interesting backstory to it. So the idea morphed into doing a book on words which have military origins. But the idea was still a compendium, to a kind of a dictionary only, if you would like to call it that, of maybe gathering 200-300 words which have military origins and how they have penetrated English. But like they say, a book writes itself. You don't really control a book once the idea has, started taking shape. And that is what happened with this book too. And what it is today is very different from what we conceived. It not only talks about words of military origin, which are there, but it talks about how entirely the military shapes our English-speaking world, our daily language, from boardrooms to the media, to politics, to sports. The book is divided into 4 parts. And the first part is actually a complete analysis and understanding of our war literature, or war lit as we like to call it. Because war lit has been one of the major influences from where words have come into everyday English, as well as how we speak. So part 1 became a great deep analysis of war lit, and not only talking about international war lit like espionage fiction or thrillers, or let's say books like The Hunt for Red October by Tom Clancy or FICINT, but also about Indian war lit, which has a very different trajectory compared to Western war lit. It also talks about poetry, reportage, so many things. And then how these phrases came into our boardrooms and, our media rooms and all that. So that's part 1 of the book. Part 2, to give a break from the, the monotony of the flow, is a collection of vignettes and anecdotes. We call them interludes, which are fascinating small pieces about certain words and phrases like Dulali, like Shakespeare's contribution to the military, like, for example, how fashion uses military terminology, and so on and so forth. There's a very nice write-up on Kilroy Was Here, which is graffiti, and how graffiti also is part of influence on the English language. Part 3 is a slightly historical trace, starting from the Norman conquest, when French words started coming into the English language in military, and from there into everyday English. So a lot of your ranks, a lot of your words stem from 1600, when they came with the Norman conquest into the English language. And thereon, moving on to World War I, World War II, Cold War, all these terminologies, they came into our normal everyday English. And then the original idea of that compendium, so we have about, I think, a couple of 100 words, where words like ambulance, how it comes from the military, or, so many words that have come from India, from colonial India. So dinghy, or, so many other words. So then we talk about those. And then part 4 is where the heart of the book lies in my understanding, which is FAUJIPEDIA. How the Indian military language so different from the Western, having had its roots in Sanskritic times, our Ramayana and Mahabharata, but then moving into Persian times where you had the Mughal Raj for 300 years, then the colonial times, and then now for finally the modern Indian army. So how these have played such a significant role in influencing the way Indian Faujis speak, and then how Indian society has absorbed Indian Fauji talk. From your social media, WhatsApp forwards, Fauji brats, our great organizations like the NCC, which train our youth, our Sainik schools, there's so much that India has that is connected to the military, our cantonment towns, even our names, for example, Punjabi names, Jarnail Singh, Karnail Singh, Major Singh. I mean, you just think of it, then the Bahadurs, and so much is there that is coming from the military. And it has such a deep connect to our everyday life. And surprisingly, the etymology of the phrase Jai Hind. And it's a beautiful story which I will narrate when we have some more time. But how Jai Hind came into existence and how it has become our official greeting today in the armed forces. And then there is an epilogue which talks about 2-3 issues very closely connected to us, like our dearth of war literature in India specific context, and why we will always speak like soldiers, why it's such an integral part of us, and what if we don't speak like soldiers? What will that really help us as humans? So these are some speculative last chapters that are there at the end of the book, and that's how this book has come about. So I would say it's culture, it's history, it's literature, it's it's so many other dimensions apart from just being about
words and
the original thought that was there, that just make a list of words that came from the military into English. So this is so much more than
So if I talk specifically about your research, when you started researching and developing this book, just like you said, it took a different shape from what you originally planned it would take. But during your research, did you anticipate the magnitude of what you would uncover?
No, I did not. No, I did not. I mean, if I had not forced myself to stop writing and finish this book where it is finished today, I think it would go on and on.
Wow.
Because there is so much more to be discovered, and which I discovered also. And it was like, no, I have to stop now because then this will not finish. So I would say that this book for readers will be more a process of discovery to explore more. This is not the end of it. And there's so much more to our warlet, there's so much more to our military culture. So it's just a flavor. These 400 pages don't, cover everything.
Of course. Of course. I think that's what the best books do, leave you curious to
They leave you curious,
more,
you have to, they make you think. And maybe then when you come across a word or phrase, something will,
spark your curiosity. Absolutely.
Carry on from there.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
So in the start of the book, and just like you've mentioned so far, there are a lot of words, words like going rogue, collateral damage, even damage control for that matter, that are so normalized in our day-to-day life. I mean, we use them so casually without even realizing where their origin is or what their backstory is. So for you, was there any particular word or phrase whose origin surprised you, and the way we use it today is completely different from the way it was actually used originally?
So there are many origin stories of words in this book that did surprise me. I mean, it was always a process of discovery for me. I'll just mention one or two. For example, the word sniper. Now, we are used to so many American movies, war movies, this and that, and sniper of late, especially after Afghanistan, has been, a very fancy thing where, movies have been made where snipers have great, action roles. So it was always a very American thing in my mind that, sniper is something that comes from there. But the word comes from colonial India. And how it comes is the British used to go for what is known as shikar. They would, go with those parties to the jungle and, shoot. And one of the birds they would try to shoot was a very small, tiny, flighty bird, which was very hard to spot in the bushes because it would almost merge. And then it was very fidgety. It would not sit still. Now that bird was called the Indian snip.
Okay.
And the shikari who could shoot an Indian snip was called a sniper.
Oh, wow.
So starting from that origin, and imagine today where you see Chris Kyle or somebody in a movie, acting like a sniper, and you just can't think that it is coming from colonial India, right? Similarly, there's another very interesting word called dulali. So dulali means mad or to be crazy. And it is a word that many authors use, from P.G. Wodehouse to Amitav Ghosh to so many other people who have used the word in their books and novels and everyday sitcoms and on the media. And Dulali also, incidentally, is connected to India. And where is it connected to India? It's connected to a town called Deolali, which is the cantonment town and the center for our armored corps. So armored corps is headquartered there, the center. And if you have time, I can narrate it at some point how this has happened, or maybe you can read the book. But Dulali comes from Deola.
One town.
Yeah, one town.
Brilliant, brilliant. And you've spoken about influences of literature, and you mentioned that's also the first part of your book because that's where it all started from.
Yes.
And of course, there's a lot of mention about James Bond, there's Bond, there's John le Carre. So, what do you think it is about spy fiction in particular that made it such an important vehicle to transmit military literature or sort of military terminology into civilian life?
So that's the reason why I opened the book with that, because when I looked at my own experience, so I'm an army brat, grew up in cantonment towns, and the most relatable films that we saw in our childhood were, espionage, spy, James Bond. And without realizing, you taken so much of that influence,
Correct.
right? That, the action hero, and lately when we've seen the Bond films, they are so captivating and so, and for example, a simple word like asset.
Yeah.
So the word asset comes squarely from your espionage terminology. So whether it's Bond earlier or Bond later, and when you say an asset has been activated in a town, you immediately anticipate that, there's going to be some big action happening, some killing, something happening. And suddenly you find that asset is actually being used everywhere.
Yeah.
You talk about your, your human assets, human resources. They are now called assets. You talk about influencer assets,
Yeah.
who help you influence social media. You talk about, so the word asset has kind of become a everyday word, but it originally came from the espionage tradecraft, right? Similarly, when you say mole, there is a mole, who's leaking information in news media or in an organization, corporate setup somewhere. But mole comes from le Carre. That's the spy fiction he created from which the mole originated. Otherwise, it just meant a burrowing animal before that, right? But we would never,
Put it in this context.
yeah, we would
I
never
would say.
feel that, that this is something. So spy fiction with words like burned, for example. So in Born Again, you see that, an asset is burned or somebody's burned. They use the word so frequently. And today we use it, that a celebrity is burned, say there's a scandal, and you say, no, he's burned. He's not going to do anything beyond this, or he or she. So the word burned, and then even in a corporate, like you said, burned out, it's like, you are not now capable of effective functioning. So these words are coming from espionage fiction. So spy fiction was the reason I thought that people will immediately understand that, oh, these are words we use every day, and these are words we've seen on screen, and we've had our spies. So how it has influenced our English.
Yeah.
That's how it comes out very strongly as a connection.
Wonderful. And then there's also a part where you talk about techno-thriller tradition, and you talk about Tom Clancy and the 1980s boom. And so it's almost as if they were the informal vehicle to convey and kind of tell people about military terminology and the military life also, not just words. So do you feel that these books were consciously written to tell people or kind of inform them linguistically about how the military talks, or were they just written for pleasure and this just happened to be a byproduct of what they
See,
were
the
doing?
techno-thriller revolution, which is the second chapter of this book, after the espionage, the spy fiction, spook speak as I call it, after that, immediately after that, was a discovery.
Okay.
That the ordinary reader, the lay reader who was reading this kind of, so there were other authors before that. If you really want to draw the bridge, you had people like Frederick Forsyth writing Day of the Jackal, you had Eric Ambler, you had so many other people who were writing books at that time. And these books were very detailed in their narrative of how operations are conducted or how, strategies are planned, stuff like that. And people resonated with it.
Yeah.
But what Clancy did was to bring in hardware terminology.
Yeah.
So when he's talking submarine warfare, he's describing submarines in great detail, technically, and their warfare capability and how warfare occurs with them. Or so in the Hunt for Red October, for example. Now there's a confluence of factors happening there. It is the Reagan era. It is the peak of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and and America. And you have Clancy bringing out these techno-thrillers. He was published by a very small press called the Naval Institute Press. It was not a mainstream publisher which picked up his manuscript. And Clancy is a non-military man. So he's actually, in those technical terms, as much a layperson as anybody else, but he's researched, he's done his homework, and he brings out all the tech-savvy details of warfare and the Cold War into his book. And people find it very thrilling and very authentic. And he becomes a bestseller, a best-selling author. And Reagan recommends it to Margaret Thatcher as a authentic way to understand what is happening between Russia and the US in the Cold War. So it's a confluence of things that suddenly makes people aware, makes such literature acceptable, and the techno-thriller revolution takes off. And then there are many, many more authors who jump into it. And the 80s and 90s is the kind of the heyday of the techno-thriller revolution. After that, it does flag down. It is taken over by other things, right? And technology is no longer the draw in a way. But yeah, so that 2 decades is significant in terms of how terminology goes into everyday language of people. Very, one would say, intricate military terminology seeping into the language. That's
So
it.
I would kind of gather from this that there was also a lot of interest in civilians themselves to understand what was
Absolutely. The
happening.
Cold War made that happen. That is what I'm saying. The confluence of factors. The Cold War had people curious, what's happening
Yeah.
between the two superpowers, right? And here was an author who was making it accessible.
Yeah.
How how the Cold War was being fought under the sea, how things were happening. And you had Reagan endorsing it. So all these things came together in a way.
Perfect. So in your introduction, you mentioned this word called FICINT, and that is fiction as a form of strategic
Yes.
thinking. And that's something that was very new to me. I had not heard of this word before.
I was also as clueless about FICINT till I wrote about it.
Absolutely.
And it follows from the techno-thriller revolution, where then once people became savvy enough to understand military terminology and were interested deeply enough into how the military works and the world works on that side, people started imagining the next World War.
Yeah.
Because it would not be fought. You had the internet come in, you had so much changes in information technology, satellites, this, that. So obviously people anticipated that, the next war is not going to be fought like this. And 2 very significant books come out. One is called 2034. And it was written by an admiral who was the supreme allied commander in Europe, the commander for NATO, in collaboration with someone. And there's another book that came a little before it called Ghost Fleet.
Right.
And both these books have the same subtitle,
Oh.
The Next World War.
Oh, wow.
Right? Fighting the Next World War. They have the same subtitle, but one is called 2034, the other is called Ghost Fleet. Now they are being written by people, for example, the Allied Force Commander, Supreme Commander of Europe would be deeply, knowing what's happening, right? At a very, very high level. So when he's penning something down, it's very authentic, very, very, what shall I say, accurate. And then they speculate on the future. So it's fiction written with a view of what can possibly happen. So it's speculative intelligence merged with your, let's say, current understanding of what is on the ground and how things will evolve from here. So that became FICINT. But the advantage of FICINT was that the militaries realized that this was a way to prepare themselves for future warfare. So having someone imagine what can happen, someone who can authentically imagine what can happen, is actually a way to learn.
So it was actually the military also learning from...
Military learning from it.
Yeah.
It got formally incorporated into academic disciplines.
Wow.
That, you know, these works of fiction, they were being used as teaching tools, research tools. So here was a marriage between fiction and research and literature, all happening in such a way that, you know, it was a win-win situation for readers, for military, for everyone to have such fiction out there. And that is the FICINT movement. Now here there are many strands to it. For example, there is a entire area which deals with, say, the PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder that you have, which is now not happening in real action, but it is happening in drone warfare. So where your pilots are and your staff and crew is sitting in safe zones, in bunkers in USA, but controlling drones in Afghanistan or Iraq or elsewhere, where you're hitting population centers due to military reasons, but having collateral damage. Now, even that causes PTSD. And these novels, these books deal with such scenarios. In fact, there's a dearth of literature there. There's more that needs to be done on drone warfare, on these kind of things. So these are futuristic scenarios which fiction is the first, let's say, the first way to compensate, to think about, you know, what can happen and how these will play out tomorrow's warfare, how it will play out today. And I must mention one thing which is not in the book, but which I discovered later in my own reading. H.G. Wells, the famous sci-fi writer, had imagined a nuclear bomb in 1910, earlier, I mean in the early 1900s, while the bomb was nowhere in, you know, practical shape.
That is
right, and eventually the bomb came about, and you had Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945.
Yeah.
So look at the imagination of FICINT and how it, you know, can imagine technologies that will come in the future and the consequences they would have and what it means for humanity. So looking back, you see the value of this. You know, that here was an author.
I think this is really interesting because we've been talking about how the military is influencing civilian life, but it's also the other way around.
It's also the other way around. Civilian authors looking at the consequence of science, consequence of technology, imagining how warfare will shape the future, and it's a two-way process. There's no way denying that.
So in the book, of course, it travels historically from the Norman invasion. We've discussed the Cold War, and we've also discussed the digital battlefields that we have today. So it's very clear that military language has not originated recently, or it's not recently that we've started incorporating it in our daily lives. It's actually over thousands of years that these words have been in play. So was it a conscious decision for you to ensure that the readers understand that this has been happening for so long, and the origin of the words and the way that they've been used has also changed over these?
So it is very much true. Some of our most the words that are most commonly used are in fact very old, very dated. So like I said, the Norman conquest was a turning point where words from French came into English, and along with that came a lot of Latin words, a lot of Roman words from the Roman army, and from Italy, from Italian. So these words, and I mentioned them in the book, it says that the English language is a remarkable tapestry woven from the threads of conquest, conflict, and cultural exchange. Amongst the most pervasive influences on modern English vocabulary are words that originated in military contexts, many of which have evolved far beyond their martial beginnings to become integral parts of everyday speech. So yes.
So words have also evolved. I mean, their usage has also evolved, although they may have been written in a certain way, talked about in a certain way, but the way we interpret them today has probably undergone a lot of change so far.
Which is true. That is why the book has chapters dealing with this, the origin of the words. Although I start with the Norman conquest, which is about 1600, where the major influence came in. In India's context, the influence can go back even backwards, because we still use, for example, we use the word Senapati for our army chief. Now, Senapati is also used at the Ramayana and Mahabharata period. So those words are as ancient, right? But yes, a lot of the words in English particularly come from the Norman conquest, when the French language influenced the English language. I can give you some examples. For example, ranks. So ranks like, for example, you have a lieutenant or you have a captain. So captain is coming from Latin, Lieutenant is also coming from the French lieutenant, right? You have corporal, you have sergeant, and you have so much then words like battalion, brigade, brigadier, campaign, right? All these are coming from those eras, right? And even before that, let's say the word strategy is coming from Greek. The word tactics is coming from Greek, right? You also have words coming from Italian. You have words coming from Spanish, right? For example, let's say if I were to give you an example, you have influences from Arabic. Admiral comes from Arabic.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Armada comes from Spanish. And Colonel comes from Italy's Renaissance movement. So the book actually goes into all that, and it tells you that, look, you know, how many languages have influenced English. That's why it's a tapestry.
Yeah.
That's why it's, like I said in the introduction, it's a tapestry woven from the threads of conflict and conquest.
Absolutely.
Because English is absorbing influence from every language, including colonial India. Like I just gave you the example for sniper.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, that's true.
So it's multiple cultures, multiple languages,
Absolutely.
multiple wars, eras
Absolutely.
that
Absolutely.
have shaped everything.
The whole of
Very
history is
interesting.
kind of human history is embedded into
Yeah,
which
the way we
language,
speak.
in a way,
Wonderful.
those words are coming
Wonderful.
from.
And another thing that you had mentioned in the book is that you've talked about Fauji tone being as important as Fauji vocabulary. So I'd like you to highlight the difference between tone and vocabulary, and why do you feel that tone may actually be more important than vocabulary at times?
So military cadence, the tone that you mentioned too, or the way we speak, is also very distinct.
Yeah.
Right. When a Fauji speaks, because one of the reasons is in the battlefield, you need a lot of clarity. Confusion is a problem, right? You may give a wrong order, or it may not be interpreted correctly. So the warfare forces you to be precise, accurate, very brief and clear. Today, corporates want to adopt the same way of, you know, talking in their presentations, or they want to bring that same. One of the things that this kind of language does is also portrays a lot of authority.
Yeah.
It's very authoritative when you speak in that way. And the same authority the civilians want to emulate in their style of speaking or in their way of conducting affairs. So, for example, today when you are planning a marketing campaign, you set up a war room. Right now, when you want
Everything is on war footing.
everything is on war footing. When you want people to step into the war room, you actually want them to behave like soldiers. Yeah. You want them to be precise. You want everything bullet pointed, PowerPoint driven, very accurate, laid out like a map. You know, tactics defined, strategy defined. So suddenly you are emulating whole models from the army, right? Another thing that one is words that have seeped in from military to civilians. The other is cadence, the style of speaking and how we speak and what we want to emulate. There's a third thing that is seeped into the civilians is doctrines. So, for example, one doctrine that I mentioned in the book, in fact, the whole idea of logistics originates from the military, which is today so integral to your e-commerce and the
any sort of
logistics chain
operations
across the world, businesses. So logistics as a concept, as a doctrine is coming from the military. Then recent doctrines like red teaming. So originally the militaries originated this idea of a red team and a blue team, where one of your own set of people would act as an adversary and you would war game and you would practice things out and you would figure out how to defeat the enemy. Today it's a hardcore corporate strategy. And red teaming is practiced in corporates, it's practiced in your cyber security, right? So today when you do cyber security in any organization, right, you do red teaming because you want as if someone should breach your defenses so that you can test against it. Right, so-called ethical hacking. Yeah. That's red teaming. So such entire doctrines have also moved from the military to the civilian domain. Words have moved, cadences have moved. So there is so much influence there.
It's absolutely fascinating to hear. I mean, I genuinely feel that we, in our day-to-day lives, we just never realize where all of this is coming from.
The whole idea of ambulance as a service comes from the military. The word ambulance comes from the military.
Wow.
They first set it up in the wars because they wanted a way to, take their wounded to medical facilities. That's how ambulance originated. Today, every hospital is equipped with ambulances. And you kind of, civilians won't understand that this is coming from military.
Absolutely.
domain.
And they are such simple terms. It's not, okay, when you say something like war footing or war room, okay, you understand there's a military connotation attached to it. But when you hear a word like strategy or you hear a word like ambulance, it never strikes you that way, Sai. So just like we've discussed, the Indian military language is a very important part of the book. So I'd like to elaborate on why Indian or our desi Fauji Speak is so culturally distinct from, say, American or British languages. Can you just elaborate on how different are Indian military languages?
It's different because through the ages, India has been a melting pot. It has attracted invaders. It has had armies come in from different parts of the world. You had armies coming from as far as Alexander, coming all the way from Greece to India to fight battles on the shores of our rivers. You had the Mongol armies come in. You had so many invaders coming in all the time from Persia, etc. And finally, of course, the colonial powers. You had the Dutch, you had the British, you had all these people.
French was also there.
French.
Yeah.
So all this has added to the inheritance of the military vocabulary of India, and leading to a lot of words entering the civilian vocabulary, and that is why India is so unique, so unique. There is a recent movement where we have started using Sanskrit terms for our newer military terminology. I have a full chapter devoted to that, and it's a very laudable movement. After all, those are our roots: the Ramayana, Mahabharata, the Arthashastra, Kamandakya Niti. So all these are our heritage from where we are deriving a lot of our military concepts, military terminology. But the truth remains that there is so much influence of so many other layers that are there that you cannot take it in any one direction. For example, I'll give a very simple example. We have words like Subedar, Havaldar, right? Now, these are Persian words, right? Now, they're so deeply, deeply embedded. Now, you have ranks like Colonia and the colonial ranks like Major, Brigadier, Colonel, right? So you have the colonial ranks, you have the ranks which are coming from the Persian era, then you have Sipahi, for example, is coming from Arabic, right? So how would you take away these influences, right? We have what is called the Paltan, and in fact, the word Paltan is so intriguing when I researched its history. I would actually like to read out to you if you permit me.
Yes, of
right?
course.
Okay. So I'm reading this out for you, a very brief passage. In India, the battalion, in the Indian Army, the battalion, which is you may say the core fighting formation, is called a Paltan by all ranks in the army parlance and traces its etymology to the Bengali polton, which comes from the English platoon, which in turn originated in the 1630s from French peloton, meaning a small group of people. Now, the original word, you should note this, is peloton, which means a small group of people. But while platoon originally referred to a small tactical unit of 20 to 50 soldiers, whereas Paltan in the Indian Army usage came to represent the entire battalion, the soldier's home unit, as seen in the concept of Pantal ki Izzat, right? A concept based on regimental value, sacrifice, honor. So one can see a phonetic naturalization, platoon to Paltan, a semantic broadening, small unit to a large military formation, and a cultural embedding deeply ingrained in the culture and identity as Izzat, right? All in a single word. And you even have places like Dehradun and Guwahati which boast of a Paltan Bazaar.
Wow.
So can you see how interesting it is कि ये word जो एक Paltan word है, ये कैसे morph हो रहा है, कहाँ वो
उसके origins कितने पीछे तक trace हो सकते हैं
via
from
Bengali to a Hindi word, which we treat as Hindi word now, right? And from a small, in English, it means a small group of soldiers, platoon. But Paltan for us means the entire regiment. And it's a cultural thing. Paltan ki
and the
Izzat
fact
is
that,
like,
exactly, it's attached to Izzat, that represents so much.
That's language for you.
Very, 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 very interesting, to see how one word can be influenced in so many ways.
I hope I answered the question. I forgot.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay.
And you've mentioned at the start that FAUJIPEDIA is the heart of the book. That's where it all started from.
Yeah.
Can you shed light on how you have structured this particular section in the book, and why do you call it the heart of the book?
I call it the heart of the book because FAUJIPEDIA is going way beyond just saying that the military influences language. FAUJIPEDIA is demonstrating to you how inextricably, firstly, it is explaining the military culture to you. What is our military culture like? It's a flavor. It's not giving you the whole, right? But it's giving you a very strong sense of what our military culture is like. And then it is showing you how deeply it is linked to India as such, to everybody. So in our homes, in our social media, because the military in India has a very special place in the hearts of the people, unlike many other nations. I mean, armies everywhere are treated with respect and heroism, but in India, it's very special. The bond between the rest of the nation and its military is very special. So when someone says that, you know, in a matrimonial ad that I want a groom from the services, it's a whole statement of aspiration saying, you know, what I am looking for when I want someone from the services to be a groom for my daughter. It's an entirely different significance. And similarly, you know, a soldier, even a retired soldier in any meeting is respected a lot, very differently from, you know, anybody else out there. So that is why this is the heart of the book. This understanding of how the military is embedded. I give you so many examples. It comes from our names. So I've already spoken about how Punjabi names and even Bahadur and all that. But there are so many other. For example, how we name businesses. Now, the moment you say that this is a Fauji's business, people treat it totally differently. That, you know, that understanding that, you know, this will be a more honest business or a more straightforward, you know, kind of a business.
Absolutely.
Right, is just inbuilt. Right. So how you name businesses, how you name schools, right? Even there, Fauj has an influence. How you are naming your geographical areas, like, for example, Defense Colony. Or, for example, Jalvayu Vihar, or, for example, so immediately people form a mental picture of what living in such a locality would be like. Surrounded by defense personnel, it's just kind of taken for granted that such a place would be, say, for example, cleaner, safer, better to live in. So you see how
it's all connected.
It's all connected. It's all connected. You know, how we perceive the army. Similarly, in WhatsApp conversations, groups, everywhere you see, and that is what this book talks about. Our youth is so deeply aspirational about the armed forces, right? That we want to emulate them in almost every respect. Even if we are not soldiers, even if we are not physically part of the army. For example, drills, right? Every school. Savdhan, Vishram, you know, they're inbuilt into you, how you, you know, do these drills in your life. And so, yeah, it's all there.
Wonderful. I'm going to touch upon a particular line that you've mentioned in the book, and it's sort of in contradiction, not in contradiction, but something different to what you've just said. So you just said that how specific words, you know, including them in your names or in your company names, can just evoke a different feeling altogether. But there's this line in your book which says, we fight battles at work, in love, and on social media. And in a way, you kind of say that we are secretly addicted to war language, you know. And I ask this specifically because in bits you kind of mourn how deeply war has actually become embedded in our day-to-day life. So while writing this book, were you conscious about not romanticizing war, but, you know, being respectful towards the institutions that actually created this language?
Yes, this was one of the thoughts that came to me, and that is why I thought it necessary to even write a very speculative chapter in the epilogue, right? Because at the end of the day, one accepts that, you know, society is more aggressive today. There is road rage. There is, you know, so much short-temperedness in our day-to-day lives. Social media is actually an angry media, right? Where you want to, you know, take out all your venom related to any subject, political or otherwise. And a lot of this is coming from military phraseology, military terminology, this, you know, this kind of language. And it would be a better society if we were not so militarized. One of the reasons why So that's a topic for another book actually, which should be talking about these things, that how the military, what shall I say, warfare capabilities have crossed thresholds which are so destructive that, to romanticize anything about the military today and warfare today is actually risky and dangerous, right? It's not romantic at the end of the day. Fighting wars is not romantic. Soldiers, when they lose lives or when they, suffer, is not romantic in any sense. So there is a need to look at this side of the story. There's a need to understand why our languages are so militarized, why everything is a war, why a marketing campaign is a war, why a political speech is war, why our news is practically war. I mean, it's all right when Operation Sindoor is going on, you are in a slightly, what shall I say, that mode. But when Sindoor is not going on, still you are in the same mode.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everything is a war for you. Every little bit thing is like a battle cry you're raising, that.
And even in our day-to-day lives, we keep referring to small things as
So you are actually making everybody go to one mode of looking at things, which is not a good sign. And therefore the book does talk about this. Fortunately, the speculative part of the book talks about how artificial intelligence can actually make a difference, because AI has the capacity to filter what you're saying. Maybe you're in a newsroom, maybe you are a writer, maybe you are writing columns, whatever you're doing. But AI has the capability to, put a check on your language, to tell you that, look, you're crossing thresholds. Why don't you twist this phrase differently? Why don't you turn this phrase differently? Why don't you write something in a slightly more sober manner? So that the level of, what shall I say, the dramatization or the kinds of de-escalates a bit.
Absolutely.
Right? And everything is not a battle. Business is not a battle. Right? The space for everybody. Right? You can compete healthily. So those kind of things.
Absolutely.
So language has a role to play, and that's also important to recognize.
And just a continuation of this. So if you feel that language shapes thoughts and then thoughts shape our actions,
Yes.
do you feel that unknowingly we are training ourselves for conflict by using this kind of language?
Yes, I do believe that. And therefore, in a way, then this book would give you that awareness that, language matters. What words we use matters. And while it's good to understand, appreciate how the military has influenced us, but if we can also bring about change with that understanding, then it is to the benefit of all of us.
Absolutely. I'm just going to end on a slightly lighter note. After writing this book, how has your language changed? Do you catch yourself using phrases or words that you wouldn't normally use?
It has definitely made me more aware. There's no denying that. And at many points when I am using a word, it clicks to me that, look, here is a military phrase I'm using, or here's a military word I'm using. And it also aids more discovery. I just gave you the H.G. Wells incident.
Yes.
So I didn't know it at the time of writing this book. But when I read it, I said, aha, this is FICINT.
Yeah.
This is FICINT in the 1900s. I wish I had known, and I would have mentioned it here.
Absolutely.
But so you are always in that mode where you're discovering these things.
Absolutely.
And yes, it helps.
That's wonderful. So we have a rapid fire for you. So if you can just answer in one word or one sentence about the question I'm about to ask you, right? Can we start?
Yeah.
Okay. So a word in the book that you now cannot hear casually anymore.
Dulali.
The chapter you enjoyed writing the most.
I would say the part, and that's FAUJIPEDIA.
Okay. The section you struggled with the most.
Again, FAUJIPEDIA.
The author you learned from the most while writing this book.
The book gave me exposure to so much more writing that I had not read earlier.
Okay.
So, for example, I had not read Stephen Meyer's Once a Eagle. So I ordered that book. I read it. I really liked the book. And so such authors.
All right. A book or writer personally that has changed how you think about war.
Right now, I would say that it's a movie that is weighing more on my mind, that has forced me to rethink about warfare, and that is Catherine Bigelow's latest movie called House of Dynamite.
Okay.
In fact, it is proving to be a trigger for my writing something. So that is what is most weighing on my...
Interesting. So this book has a lot of cartoons and illustrations. So which is the one that you love the most or you're fascinated by the most?
Nelson's School of Leadership, one. And the second one is that Punjabi cartoon which says
Dabbi chal. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Is there any habit in your own speech that you've noticed that is changing?
Because of this book,
This book?
I tend to be more aware about the words I use. That is for sure.
Absolutely. Great. And my last question is about the series itself. So this is your second book in the Unfolded series. And I know one of your aspirations with this series is to make the military literature and things about the military more accessible to people. So can you tell us about the Unfolded series in general, the books that you have written, and what your core goal is when you write these?
So the Unfolded series that we now have brought out is targeted firstly at young readers. The idea is that these are serious subjects, some of these that we talk about, and we don't have accessible writing on those subjects, right? So the goal is to give you a flavor, to give you an understanding of a very good subject in reasonable detail. Like I said, even this book is not comprehensive. It doesn't cover everything. They're deliberately not written in academic style. The rigor is a must. I won't say that these books should not be rigorous or are not rigorous. The rigor is needed, but we don't want a level of academic rigor, which, because I have realized in my career as running a bookstore and a publishing house, that academic texts tend to put off the younger readers from discovery. So the Unfolded series is meant to fill a gap which we perceived in the course of our publishing. We wanted very accessible books for curious readers on topics which are not normally covered in such a way. So for example, there could be military topics, like we talked about the history of our air defense. We had an author, Mr. Shesh Kumar, who retired from the CAG, talking about the audit trail, how audit originated in the world, how audit came about, and India's supreme audit institutions. And he's writing another book on the MSME ecosystem, which will explain a lot of nuances about how medium enterprises and small enterprises work in India and abroad. So similarly, Fauji Speak on Civvy Street was one such book in this series, which explains how the English language has been influenced by the military terminology and the military terms we have. And we have many other interesting topics coming up, military and non-military both. For example, we are having a book in the pipeline which is on the copyright law. We have one on the publishing industry. We have one which relates to constitution and the key laws which are giving us fundamental rights, right? So similarly, on a host of topics which a layman or a general reader would be very curious about, but does not find accessible literature. So these books are meant to appeal to them. They are meant to be giving you a flavor of the subject so that you can read more, delve deeper, but at the same time they carry enough rigor to satisfy your basic understanding of the subject, and written in very nice prose. That is the goal behind this. So the younger demographic, the younger readers, the curious readers, anybody who has an interest in the particular subject would enjoy these books.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think I'll talk about this book first. Of course, the entire Unfolded series has taken a lot of effort in conceiving and putting together and making sure that we kind of fulfill our goal in some way through these books. But I think this one in particular happens to be something that's very unique and something that hasn't been written about enough, or at least we are not aware of at this moment. But I hope that, I mean, for me also personally, I feel this book leaves you just enough curious to learn more. And just like you said, now in day-to-day life, you happen to view things differently, read things differently, you know.
Fauji Speak will remain with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's a book that will remain with you. So thank you so much for sharing more details about this book and about the series. And we wish this book the very best.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm grateful for that.